I know you want to see the house. You know I want to show you the house. It's just not that simple anymore, is it? Let's go all the way back to August 2024. So the National Association of Realtors settled a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, that has a direct impact on you, the buyer, in a real estate transaction. Now, state of South Carolina, it really didn't affect it too much, but it still made some changes that are important. Well, first, before we talk about a buyer agency agreement, let's talk about the three ways that it actually did change for the buyers all across the country. So number one, now in anywhere that you're trying to see a house, North, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, anywhere, a buyer agent, myself, we are required to have a buyer agency agreement in place in order to show a home. No ifs, no buts, no coconuts. Stick around to the end of the video. I'll tell you a secret that most agents don't want to tell you. Second change, you're going to negotiate directly with your buyer agent on what they're going to get compensated to represent you in the real estate transaction. In the past, the seller would generally agree to pay the buyer's agent directly through the listing brokerage. In some cases, that's still the case. Now, within my brokerage, our seller pays the buyer brokerage directly. It doesn't pass through the listing agency if they agree to pay buyer compensation at all. Number three, if the seller is paying buyer compensation, it's no longer listed on the MLS. So your agent, your buyer agent, has to pick up the phone or reach out to the listing agent to say, hey, Mr. Listing Agent, is your client offering buyer agency compensation? If the seller's not paying compensation or the compensation is less than the amount that you and your agent have agreed on, then you as the buyer are required to make up the difference. So ultimately, if they're not paying, your agent's not working for free. So just for the record, I haven't found one seller yet that has not been paying some sort of buyer agency commission. So now we come to the real purpose of what I want to do on this video. So now that you know the changes that are made and you know that your agent has to have a buyer agency agreement in place to show you a house, we're going to take a look at it so you understand what it is and what it means. So down in the description, I am going to add a copy of the South Carolina Buyer Agency Agreement, the North Carolina Buyer Agency Agreement, and EXP, the company I currently broker for. We're going to add their single property agreement so that way you know what it looks like. For the purpose of the conversation, we're going to focus in on the South Carolina agreement. Now, let's talk about the South Carolina agreement. It's 5 pages and there's 20 sections. Yes, it sounds like a lot. No, it's really not. And we're going to go over every line in this video to make sure that you understand. Listen, I'm not that guy. I'm not going to read this thing line by line because, frankly, at the end of the day, I'm going to attach it. You can read it. I just want you to understand the spirit of the contract and ask me questions if you have it. You ready? Let's go. So at its most basic form, a buyer agency agreement is just a contract of employment. It is my employment contract saying that I'm going to work directly for you as your fiduciary. I'm going to be working directly for you and I'm going to do what's in your best interest. Now that's what a fiduciary does. They act in your best interest. Doesn't matter what's important to anybody else, including themselves. They have to do what's best for you. That's one of the major reasons why it really is important for you to have a buyer agent. So let's jump to number one. So the number one thing is the appointment of the broker. What this says is you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're putting my brokerage to work subject to the terms of the contract. So your agent is the acting licensee and they are signing the contract for the broker who is actually the one working for you. And basically what it's saying is everything that has to do with the real estate transaction, the other agents have to go through them as opposed to communicating with you directly. Number two line is the purpose of the agency. This is what you're hiring your agent to do. This is where we talk about and you choose what type of real estate you're looking for, how much you're looking for, where you're looking for. Is there anything else that's important in that transaction? So that's really the who, what, when, where, and how of the contract. So the third thing on the list, this is where I'm telling you what my broker is going to do for you in the transaction. So we're going to talk, this is your agent's job. We're going to talk about each line that is separated on here so that way you understand it. And if there's any questions you can ask, we're going to jump into A, that the broker will explain what buyer agency is and will do everything in the best of their ability to find the property that you're looking for. So buyer agency is just that. It's an employment contract. There's different types of agency. We're going to put that down there in the description as well so you understand that. Next, under broker duties, unless the broker also represents the sellers, they have to put your sole interest ahead of everybody else's, including theirs. So the third part of broker duties is what happens if the broker does represent both sides of the transaction. So if you're the buyer, they also represent the seller. What this section basically says, number one, that's called dual disclosed agency. The broker must maintain all confidentiality with both the buyer and the seller unless given permission by both parties. So in order for us to do this as brokers, we need your permission to act as a dual agent. What does D say under broker duties? It basically says brokers represents multiple buyers and these buyers may be interested in the property that you're interested in. Chances are we're going to have more than one client and they may just like the house that you like to. What's the last part of broker duties? Well, this basically says that brokers can't tell you that our services are free. Nobody's doing this for the practice. Somebody's paying us. If it's not you, it's the seller, or there may be some other option out there that I don't know about to talk about. But ultimately, at the end of the day, buyer agent has to get paid. Just a couple more notes under broker duties. Unless South Carolina law supersedes it, all information that you gave to your agent or broker during the contract time is still a secret. We can't tell anybody about it, even after you terminate or close the purchase. The broker and the licensee will work diligently to find what your buyer is looking, what you, the buyer, is looking for, and will send you properties to meet your criteria. So ultimately, that's what the broker is responsible for. But if you think that it's just the brokers that's got responsibility in this agreement, think again. That's right. It is not just a one-way street on this buyer agency agreement. You have responsibilities as a buyer too. So what would the buyer agree to do? Number one, you're going to work with the broker and their agent by allowing the broker to represent you, identify, negotiate, and represent you in the transaction of that real estate. Number two, you hold the broker harmless from liability if the seller or the buyer gave them bad information. This next part's two-parter. So the next thing is that you have to provide us with reliable information as it relates to your pre-approvals and verifications of funds, and you have to be available for us to be able to show you homes. Now, my brokerage doesn't handle earnest funds at all, but this section says it's not the broker's fault if a company other than the broker mishandles earnest funds. Again, we don't touch that money. The last thing in this section that you, the buyer, are agreeing to do is to allow the attorney or settlement agents to communicate with the broker regarding transaction paperwork. We got to be able to review it to make sure it's right, and we got to be able to have it in to close the transaction. I honestly think this is crazy to be in a contract because of the way that my process works, but you have to provide a description of what kind of property you're looking for, the location, and price range. If we don't know what kind of fish you're looking for, it's going to be kind of hard to get you in the right pond. So let's talk about how your agent is paid. So once the broker earns their money, and the broker earns their money when the contract is signed and it's due to be paid either when that transaction closes or if you default. If you default, funds are immediately due. That means you got to pay them now, no ifs, buts, or coconuts. That also means that you, the buyer, are responsible to pay the buyer broker unless the seller or the seller broker pays compensation. Now, again, compensation is fully negotiable at time of signing this agreement. So when you are having a conversation with your buyer agent, they're going to talk about what they want to charge, and that's going to be next on the list. So you as the buyer, what exactly are you negotiating? Well, brokerage are paid in one of three ways. They're either going to get paid a flat fee. So they're going to say for any house, this is what I charge, period. They're going to charge a percentage of the closing price. And this is generally the way that I operate. Or they're going to charge a percentage of another amount. I don't know what other amount you could possibly pay on, but that's part of this negotiation. Next part, how are they getting paid? Well, the method of payment either comes from three sources. It either comes solely from you, the buyer, it comes from a combination of the buyer and the seller or listing brokerage, or it comes directly from the seller or listing brokerage only. Those are the only three ways. So now there's only two other things that you could get charged for on your buyer agency agreement and during the transaction. One is a retainer fee. This is basically as a buyer agent saying, hey, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, I charge a certain amount of money just to get in the car and open the door. And this is going to be paid directly to me ahead of time. And it is a credit on your closing statement. The other thing that you could get charged for, depending on the agency and the broker, is an administrative fee. Now, this administrative fee is generally a fee that's paid that allows the broker to make sure that they have all the administrative support and help to make sure your transaction goes off without a hitch. Next section, section 6, terms of agency. What this basically means is it's basic. This is when do we get to work and when does the transaction end. Now, we're going to put a date out in the future of when the transaction ends no matter what, but it's going to end on a specific date or at the close of the transaction. Line number 7, you're going to receive a disclosure of agency for the state of South Carolina. You're also going to receive a similar document in the state of North Carolina. I'm going to attach both down in the description. So basically in this section, line 7 is where you decide if you're willing to accept dual agency, if you won't accept dual agency, and if you are to accept dual agency, if you will or won't consider designated agency. Dual agency happens when the broker represents both the buyer and the seller. Designated agent allows the broker to still act as a 100% fiduciary because they have a specific agent representing both parties. So just to make it 100% clear, dual agency happens when a broker has both the buyer and seller. So let's make this quick assumption just for the sake of the video. If I'm representing you as the buyer and we go to look at a home that is represented by the broker that I work for, currently that's eXp Realty. So if eXp Realty has a home that you like and it's under a different agent, dual agency exists. It is what it is. So what we need to make sure we do is, number one, you need to understand that. Number two, we need to make sure that we put together a document showing that I am your designated agent and the other agent is the agent of the seller. Line number 8, you are not that broker's only client. So I want to make you feel like you're the only client that I have. I want to make you feel like you're the most special person in the world, because at that moment in time, you are the most special person in the world to me, I promise. But with that being said, other people are going to like the properties you like. So that broker will have other agents, or maybe I have other clients that I'm showing the same houses to. It is what it is. So let's talk about the first really big word on the contract: indemnification of broker. Dum, dum, dum. So basically what this is saying is you got to tell the broker if you're working with another broker or if you have in the past, because of a little thing called procuring cause. Now, if you fail to disclose that you are working with another broker or have worked with another broker within the last 6 months, then if we go and look at the same house that broker A showed you and broker B, me, we decide to write a contract, you may owe 2 sets of commissions. So it's pretty important that you let us know what's going on. Number 10, are you going to let me tell people who you are? Now, I always say this box needs to say yes. You should let the person know who you are, because if you don't, how am I going to write the contract? Section 11, broker liability limitation. So what this basically is saying, that unless the broker intentionally or willfully acted negligently, a broker can't be held responsible for any amount above what the agreed upon compensation is. And the buyer agrees to pay anything above that. Simple. Number 12 is non-discrimination. Basically what this is saying is that you as the buyer and me as the broker or broker agent agree to comply with all local, state, and federal fair housing laws as it relates to protected statuses. Number 13, professional counsel. Your broker and your agent are just that. They are a real estate broker and a real estate agent or salesperson, and they are not any other professional. They're not an attorney. They're not a mortgage person. They are not a inspector or a home inspector or anything of that nature. They are going to talk to you about real estate in general. Don't ask them to try to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything else, because that's not what they're trained to do. Number 14 is mediation. Anything in this agreement is in dispute, don't sue us. Let's talk about it. We'll go to mediation and get it worked out. Number 15, which is one of the lines that I stress every time I talk to somebody, sex offenders and criminal information. You got to do your own homework, folks. I don't know, and I won't look, because once I look and I tell you something, I become liable. And if that information that I found is not correct, then you can hold me liable. So don't ask. Next line is just a disclosure that's saying you and I and the broker are entering into a binding agreement. Once we sign it, we are under contract, and any changes that we make have to be in writing. So the next section is section 17, and it's contingencies. This is where there will be a list of contingencies on the buyer agency agreement. I want to be honest with you folks. I've never used this section. I don't know how it would be used. If you're a real estate professional, comment below. Let me know how you've used it in the past. Number 18, facsimiles or other electronic means. This basically means that we are in the 2020s, folks. At the taping of this, at the filming of this video, we're in the 2020s. So we are going to communicate electronically. It's what we do. Now, it does say facsimile. I don't even own a fax machine. I don't even know if I could get a fax, but it's out there. So basically what this is saying is e-sign is valid. Electronic forms of communication is valid. Number 19 is surveillance. This is basically saying, hey, if you go into a house and look at a house, there is a chance that you could be getting recorded. So just making you aware. What I always tell people is, number one, when I'm walking up on a house with a client, if I see a Ring camera, I point to it and say, hey, be careful what you say. If you love it, don't talk a lot about it, because it may hurt us from a negotiation standpoint. If you hate it, don't talk a lot about it, because you could make somebody upset. We don't want to make anybody upset. Last thing that we have to talk about before we get down to the signatures is the only way, it's number 20, it's the amendment clauses. The only way we can change this agency agreement is if we fill it out and amend it. Everybody has to agree, and total compensation must be based on section 5, and it cannot go higher than that amount unless it is amended. Now, we have gone through the entire contract from number 1 all the way down to number 20. We've talked a little bit about some disclosures, which we'll probably get into in some other videos. But at the end of the day, the only thing left to do on this next section is sign it, date it, make sure all the contact information is correct. And we are now under agency agreement, and I can show you a house. Remember when I told you I had a secret? Here's a secret. Exclusivity doesn't really exist. It's becoming harder and harder in today's culture in the real estate industry to have an exclusive agreement. So what happens if you go out and you date somebody else? First of all, I'm going to be really heartbroken. Second of all, and the part that you really care about is what happens if I show you a house and then you get your friend Jeff. I'm assuming his name's Jeff. I don't know. Maybe it's Jeffy. Maybe it's a lady realtor and her name's Jeffy. A little known fact, that was my great-grandmother's name. I digress. So you get another agent to write a contract for a house that I showed you. Who gets the compensation for that? Well, the reality is I would be due compensation for that. But you have a contract, and Jeff wrote the contract for you. Well, you may just be on the hook to pay 2 agents and not just 1. So I think it's pretty important that we talk about exclusivity. Is it there? If it's not, it should be. So that's the buyer agency contract. Now, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to go ahead and make sure that we talked about this was, at the end of the day, there are people that we get connected to, whether it be through internet sources. They visit our website and we call and chat, and they want to go see a house. Zillow, Realtor.com. People call us from there and they're like, hey, I'd really love to go look at this house. Here's the deal. I want to be able to show you the house. At the end of the day, I have to have this agency contract. Are there some agents out there that may decide that they would forego the agency contract and risk losing their business license in order to show a home? Probably. There may be. So we're going to follow the law.